Okay, I'm here with Kieran Nandra, Senior Product Specialist, Emerging Equities of Pictet Asset Management. Why should an investor invest in emerging markets now? Equities, that is.
Yeah. So I think the long-term investment case for emerging equities is really clear in terms of just the growth profile, having higher growth from emerging market economies, and the fact that that tends to go hand in hand with the asset classes outperformance. So why now? I think there are a couple of reasons why now. So you're seeing an acceleration of emerging market GDP versus developed market GDP. So we have, for example, an expectation for a 3% GDP performance uptick versus developed markets, and that tends to go hand in hand with equity market outperformance. So those two things are correlated. So that's one thing. You've been expecting that growth pickup. Secondly, I would say that just taking a step back for the last 2 years, we've had the trade war, which clearly has stifled demand. At the same time, that really kicked off in 2018, you had this almost perfect storm where China was tightening liquidity. And so within China, which clearly is one of the biggest drivers of global growth now, you had this perfect storm where you've got the trade war, which is impacting consumer sentiment, and you've got this liquidity going on at the same time, and you've got regulatory changes happening. It was like, it was just the worst possible time. Fast forward to 2019, you've got an improvement in the trade war situation. That was particularly towards the end of 2019, with that phase one trade deal being likely to be signed, and it was. We had a pickup in PMI indicators, and after probably around 12 months of earnings downgrades, we actually started seeing a pickup in those earnings revisions. And so why now? I think you've got that long-term growth trajectory, which is improving, but you've got those shorter-term on-the-ground factors like earnings revisions, PMI, better sentiment picking up. And I think, all those factors make me think that now is a good time to be investing in the region.
You mentioned China. How important is Chinese economic growth for the whole universe now?
Yeah. So, we used to say that when the US sneezes, the whole world catches a cold. It feels like a little bit. China sneezes, the whole world catches a cold. So, so China is probably around 20% of global GDP, and so that's why we haven't really spoken about coronavirus, but that's why there are a few more concerns in that this time around than last time around when we had SARS. I think China was still only like 3 to 5% of global GDP. So it's becoming an increasingly important part as a global growth driver. So if the country stumbles, it has an impact for sure.
And how do you address this vast universe of emerging markets equities? It's really diverse. So how do you?
Yeah. So I think it's important. So we tend to look at it. It is very, very broad, and I think the mistake would be to look at it as just one big block. So you have, on the one hand, and again, they're still quite different. We've got China and India, which we would see as being more diverse economies, less volatile in terms of their GDP growth patterns. And you compare that to regions like LATAM, EMEA, which are much more commodity focused. And so if you look at the drivers of their economies, it's much more concentrated on oil, for example, just generally commodities. And so going back to your first question, the interesting thing is that when you've had issues, for example, the coronavirus, actually countries like Russia have really felt the impact there because of the oil price and how much China needs that commodity. So I think it's important to understand what the drivers are across the different economies. And so for us, we would say certain countries are real long-term structural growth have long-term structural growth stories, like India, like China, and then you have more kind of cyclical areas like Latimia, if you want to call it that. You need to go in there at a certain point to really benefit from the performance.
And are there a lot of interesting companies? Why?
Oh gosh, there's always lots of interesting companies. So I think Asia, and China is a big part of that, as at the forefront of tech innovation.